This video was intended to be much longer, almost 10 hours long in fact. Due to unforeseen complications though, I'm instead going to upload it in a series of smaller parts. So if by the end of this you're wondering where the rest of it is, I'll be releasing another video next week, the rest will be uploaded on a weekly basis after that, and maybe a final cut sometime after all is said and done. I hope you enjoy, and a happy 20th anniversary to Fate Stay Night. Hello there, and welcome to my critique and cross-analysis between Fate Zero and Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. To start things off, I want to apologize if I sound a bit boring to listen to, but for this particular video in length, I think I'd just rather talk in a more normal tone. I'm sorry my voice isn't sexy to listen to, but I don't expect too many people to watch this, since it's a little different from the normal content I put out. In fact, this was initially intended to be my channel's first upload, but once I actually began taking a crack at the content, I began to realize just how much ground I had to cover, or rather, how much ground I desperately wanted to cover. Fate is a series I've been very invested in. I've mostly been attached to the anime adaptations, but that's only because my first experience was with an adaptation, Fate Zero. I had first heard about it on Giguk's channel when he made an Anime Zone video on it, back when he made Anime Zone videos anyways, and it sounded interesting. The summary he gave was a bit to be desired, but it was at least enough to get me interested. A battle royale between 7 mages chosen by the Holy Grail, where the winner will be granted any wish they desire, with each mage getting a powerful servant to fight alongside them, known as a heroic spirit, summoned from the past. And that was probably the most interesting part about it. Battle royales were already stories that were fairly simple but have a lot of potential. Take several characters, give them well fleshed out motivations and backstories, or at least enough that they could be interesting to watch, then put them in a room, make them fight to the death, and see what you get out of it. It's a novel concept, one that tends to be done wrong more often than it should, but I'd like to believe that its simplicity is one of the main appeals of things like tournament arcs. But what really got me interested were the heroic spirits. Having characters from ancient history and mythology of a long bygone era, reborn into the realm of today, fighting for the same thing as their masters. Noble figures such as King Arthur, Alexander the Great, Gilgamesh, and exactly who you're thinking. They too would be a part of this death game, and to that I said, okay, I'll give it a watch. And I've been following Fate ever since. I was somewhat aware of Fate Zero's predecessor, Fate Stay Night, a 2006 anime adaptation of the visual novel under the same name, though I had mostly tried avoiding any information regarding the 2006 series, or anything else Fate-related, but immediately after I had finished Zero, I was ready to begin with Stay Night. I actually hadn't planned to play the visual novel, mostly because I didn't see it on Steam, and anything that I couldn't get there at the time, or couldn't find at a GameStop, wasn't something that I felt like scouring the internet to find. Whether or not I regret that decision is still something I'm unsure of. So, in summary, how was Fate Stay Night? Though not written by the same man who wrote the light novel for Fate Zero Gen Urobuchi, surely an adaptation of Kinoko Nasu's rise to claim, Fate Stay Night could engage me just as much as Zero had. Perhaps I formed a bias after watching these anime out of order. Perhaps my expectations were set too high for an adaptation that came out nearly a decade prior, but I do sometimes wonder, if I had chosen to start with Stay Night, would I have ever discovered Fate Zero? Would I have even returned to Fate at all? Needless to say, I didn't like it. But, lo and behold, the anime gods were merciful and blessed us with a remake of Fate Stay Night known as Unlimited Blade Works, which is the adaptation I've chosen to compare to Zero. Animated by the same company that worked on Zero, known as UFOTable, or UFOTable by some, the series came out a few years after Fate Zero was an adaptation of one of the 3 routes you could take in the visual novel, referred to as the Fate route, Heaven's Feel, and Unlimited Blade Works, respectively. Supposedly, the 06 series took inspiration from the Fate route, though I'm told it has a little bit of all 3 in it. I guess I wouldn't know, I still haven't read the damn thing. And Heaven's Feel is... well, I won't be covering any of that today. So, how was Unlimited Blade Works? And is it better than Fate Stay Night? Well, that seems to be the consensus, and most will either point newcomers towards this or Fate Zero, so it's commonly accepted that these two are the best entry points to the franchise, as far as anime is concerned anyways. But is it better than Fate Zero? Well, that is the question of the day now, isn't it? The fanbase seems to be in agreement that you can get into the franchise by starting with either one. Actually, trying to determine which one you should start with seems to be a point of contention, so a comparison between the two is inevitable, and that is one reason why I'm doing it. It could be questioned why I don't compare it alongside all 3 routes, but this is more so a comparison of what are widely considered to be the 2 main entry anime to the series. I have other reasons that we'll discuss when relevant, but if there's any merit behind that claim, then these anime should hold up on their own, by their own. There will be no outside context provided beforehand, just as a newbie likely wouldn't have any knowledge about the franchise. Not about any other anime, not about the visual novel, and not even about Fate Zero's light novel. Though given my experience with the franchise, I don't deny that I have a sort of bias towards Fate Zero, and that's discounting my own thoughts on the fight scenes in Blade Works that I've made vocal in recent videos. But in an effort to look at both shows and appreciate and critique them for what they are, I'm going to be as fair and unbiased as possible. I will be criticizing both shows where need be, challenging my understanding of Fate Zero's quality, while bringing to light as much that would give Blade Works a fair run in comparison. And for that, I feel that both deserve a good analysis. With that in mind, the actual comparison will be between the characters of either cast. There are many things that both shows achieve equally in terms of aesthetics, animation, sound quality, and so on, and this is of no surprise since both share the same animation studio. But to truly analyze their writing, I believe the answer starts at the core of all stories: characters. The story is focused around a battle royale, so it should only make sense that the characters fighting that death battle are, or should be, the most fleshed out and important part of that story. After all, their motivations create the conflict as they fight one another, the conflict gives them struggles, and those by extension create the plot. So this analysis is going to be focusing primarily on the characters of Zero and Blade Works respectively, going through each of them by servant and their master, and analyzing them beside their counterpart from the other anime. This isn't so much to imply that all characters serve the same narrative purpose as their counterparts do, but I do find it easy to structure the comparison this way. More than that, however, despite not sharing the same narrative roles as their counterparts, some characters of the same class suffer from the same issues. Additionally, it will allow me to compare returning characters that appear in both shows, as well as the main protagonists. But ultimately, this setup is primarily for organizational purposes. The actual comparisons between these two anime are going to be kept to a minimum, as I believe the superior product will become evident on its own. Instead, I'm opting for a sort of side-by-side analysis, if that makes any sense. I'm making this distinction from a direct comparison because I'll simply be analyzing both anime independently of one another for most of the video. Then, only afterwards will we use what's been observed and compare the two in the end. Now, realistically, this is the part that I'd recommend you watch both Fate Zero and Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works before continuing. Not only because this video will contain heavy spoilers for both anime, leaving little left uncovered by the end, but also because it might be helpful to understand some of the context behind my analysis before you continue. But I also understand that some people don't have that kind of time. Unfortunately, if you really aren't sure yet if it's worth your time, rest assured I've organized the sections for this analysis by way of incrementing spoiler level. I'll start off with some of the less important characters, so as to keep the spoilers of the story to a minimum early on, working my way up as we continue, and hopefully you'll decide to give one of these a shot by the time we get to Ryder. Although, for Zero's case, I wouldn't recommend waiting that long. I've put a lot of work into the script and the editing, so I hope it comes out satisfactory. Please keep all of this in mind as we begin our comparison, starting with our first servant, Assassin. Kojiro Sasaki is rather lackluster in Bladeworks compared to the many other characters. Yet even the content we have is surprising for as scarce as it is. He appears a grand total of 3 times in the 24 episodes of Unlimited Bladeworks, though to his credit there's at least a reason for that. Assassin was summoned as an incomplete servant, and in order to maintain his form, he must remain at Ryudo Temple, severely limiting his ability to play an active role in the story. There's little I can explain what an incomplete servant is, primarily because Bladeworks does little to elaborate on it either. But from what I gather, this is because Assassin was summoned by another servant, something that, under normal conditions, isn't allowed. But the more interesting difference is that Assassin isn't even real. There may have been a figure by the name of Kojiro Sasaki, but he is not him. Rather, Assassin is an incarnation of a character from folktale by the name of Kojiro Sasaki. Which is admittedly funny because, in this same Grail War, King Arthur, Hercules, and Medusa of all people are summoned, yet the one who viewers are least likely to know turns out to be the fictitious one. I don't know, I find it funny. The first of his appearances has the most substance out of the 3. Saber attempts to rescue her master when she's intercepted by Assassin. He manages to hold his own and nearly defeats Saber near the end, proving himself to be an incredibly formidable foe. We see that he has a level of honor and respect for his opponents. Unlike his master, who delights in the suffering and subjugation of others, Assassin shows great respect for Saber as a swordsman, although it's presented more so as teasing on the surface. Later, however, Assassin actually allows Saber to escape with her master. He cares first and foremost about the fight. He allows the swordsman he respects to leave with her master, even when it would be advantageous not to, because he doesn't want unnecessary complications sullying their duel. Even knowing that he cannot leave, and may not see Saber a second time, he would rather hope for a second encounter than end things in a more dishonorable fashion. Between this and his second appearance yet to come, we can also discern that Assassin is rebellious. Despite swearing loyalty to a master, he has no problem questioning or even mocking her, even to his own detriment. He points out his own master's rebellious actions towards her master, even though he gains nothing from it. He has no attachment to his master or hers, so his rebellious behavior is rather telling about his character. He doesn't let his entrapment hinder who he is or his interests. And this brings on some interesting speculation when we finally learn about his identity in the 3rd appearance. He has no pride as a heroic spirit, because he never existed in the first place, but that won't stop him from finding pride in what little existence he has. His rebellious attitude is not just to challenge Saber and Castor, but to find some semblance of meaning in his spontaneous new life, almost as if he derives a level of enjoyment from these challenges. If there's one thing that's disappointing about Kojiro, it's that there isn't more of this. A lack of development is not necessarily a bad thing, even for someone with the kind of potential that Kojiro could have had. There's enough here to add other layers of intrigue to his story, possibly by exploring existential themes while focusing more directly on his struggle to find some kind of pride in his form. But the fact that these aren't delivered isn't what's disserviceable about his character. Rather, he is somewhat rushed due to how few opportunities he has to develop. This is indicative in both encounters with Saber. In their first fight, Kojiro takes a sizable amount of time simply to explain what his sword technique is and how he mastered it. Saber does not interrupt this, despite how urgent it is that she rescue Shiro. In fact, knowing that Saber is here to rescue her master, the two could have called off this duel entirely to rescue their respective masters, as at this point they would have more pressing issues than to fight one another. And as much as Kojiro dislikes his master, he cares enough about her safety to use his strongest attack in response to the danger she's in so that he can end the fight quickly. Even if his intention were to finish the fight knowing that his master would be dead soon, the urgency would still be there regardless. This is all because, if he were to do any of these, the audience wouldn't learn about his background, and given how little screen time he has, there's almost no opportunity to deliver this information otherwise. The same can be said about their second encounter. Saber is far more pressed for time, with even greater risks at stake than before. Still, she decides to wait for Assassin to finish explaining his backstory instead of rushing to stop the world-ending event. But then how else would we learn about Kojiro's identity? There's almost no other chances to deliver this information in a more natural way, but that's unfortunately a result of the way that Assassin was written. This doesn't mean that what we have isn't still a good character, merely that its delivery stands to be improved. Side characters, even those with no arc to call their own, still have a part to play and a role to fulfill. These characters, like anything else in writing, are tools for the author to best tell their story. A great writer uses the tools they can to the best of their ability, even if they do not match up to those of other tools, and maintains them as best they can while still attempting to reach their desired goal consistently. Which begs the question, how is Assassin handled in Zero? Especially since he doesn't have nearly the level of characterization as Kojiro. He doesn't get a lot of screen time in his first appearance, and his second is the more notable of the two. During his rather brief appearance in the first episode, it's implied that he's used primarily for reconnaissance, assuring both his master and Tokiomi that the premises is free of spying familiars. While this doesn't tell us much about his character, it does tell us more about the stage of the war we're in. Despite not having officially started yet, it's already clear that suspicions ought to be high for what's yet to come. Some masters even summon their servants preemptively for that exact reason. And although Assassin has assured that no one is watching, it does tell us that this will undoubtedly change as time goes on, meaning this kind of scrupulous tactic is common among masters. His next appearance is near the end of episode 2, and it tells us a lot more about him rather than the world. We see that he's skilled at infiltration, bypassing advanced magical security with relative ease, which also further accentuates the lengths these masters will go to in order to protect themselves. But the scene changes almost instantly against Assassin's favor, just a moment later.
地を這う虫けら風情が誰の許しを得て表を上げる
At first glance, these introductions seem rather lackluster or just plain disserviceable to Assassin, but in truth, they complement his purpose to the plot rather well. Assassin's primary purpose to the plot is world building. Not a lot, but he certainly does his fair amount to show us how the Holy Grail War is fought. There's a lot that we can infer even from Assassin's first death, not the least of which includes his noble phantasm that saved him from being eliminated. Every servant is given something known as a noble phantasm, which is the manifestation of a hero's most famous moment in life in the form of a weapon, object, ability, or technique. Assassin's noble phantasm allows him 100 duplicates of himself. So even though one may have died, 99 others still exist, unbeknownst to the other competitors. We learn through Assassin that the Holy Grail War is not a battle royale fought with just strength alone, but also cunning and deceit. And while it may be a contest with rules and regulations upheld by an overseer, it is still a war, and these rules have workarounds. Prior to joining the war, Assassin's master formed an alliance with Archer's master, Tokiomi. In conjunction with his father, who also happened to be the overseer of the war, the three of them secretly conspire against the other masters. The scene where Assassin dies was one staged by the three of them in order to deceive the other competitors. They made sure that the battle was conducted at Tokiomi's manor for two reasons. First, because the Tosaka estate is an unhidden location. The other combatants would have familiars just outside the premises in order to keep tabs on Tokiomi's whereabouts. This means that they would witness the battle and wouldn't think to assume that the two masters were working together. But more notably, it would mean that the other masters who viewed the battle would assume Assassin to be dead and Kirei to be out of the fight. This grants them a couple of advantages, not the least of which is the element of surprise. Since all of the other masters think Assassin is dead, they wouldn't be expecting him or his master to still be spying on them. But another advantage it grants is the Overseer's protection. Since the Overseer is meant to be as neutral as possible, masters whose servants are eliminated are granted sanctuary in the church where the Overseer resides. This way, eliminated masters don't have to worry about other masters coming after them for one reason or another, now that they're no longer in the competition. By staging Assassin's death, he can pose as an eliminated master with the added protection of the Church. As mentioned, the Holy Grail War is fought with many different means, and Assassin is not the only one to demonstrate this. Though it's still a very small significance, Assassin at least has some relevance to the story. And admittedly, this isn't even his most important role. That would be his role in Ryder's conflict with Saber. Through his opposition with Ryder in episode 11, he enables Ryder to show what a king is truly meant to be and embody, but that's something that I'll cover in greater detail when I get to that section. This same scene, however, is also likely Assassin's greatest flaw. The usage of the word tool when describing Assassin is not only apt because of how he is a tool for the plot, but also as a tool for Kirei. He's used primarily as a sacrificial pawn to perform reconnaissance and can be sacrificed without consequence. Their final death is the most evident of this, as we see the complete army of assassins are summoned to push Ryder to use his noble phantasm only so Kirei and Tokiomi can know what it is. Their whole purpose from their very beginning was merely to die for their master, and therein lies the problem. If you haven't noticed, the issue with Hassan is almost the complete inverse of Kojiro. Where Bladeworks' assassin had a character, but very little relevance to the plot beyond acting as a roadblock for Saber, Zero's assassin serves many benefits to the world and setting, but with detrimentally little character. We're expected to believe that they don't have any questions or concerns about their sacrifices. The assassins are not only treated like pawns, but they never take issue with this either. This could mean one of two different things. Either we're expected to believe that they understand their role, and just don't care, or that Kirei has managed to further deceive them into thinking that they could win against Archer even after everyone else was eliminated. The latter is more unlikely for them to conclude. All servants are summoned into this world with knowledge of their present circumstance, including a generalized understanding of their role to play in the Grail War. If they're told that the winner must outlast the remaining 6 servants, an alliance between two masters would mean one would eventually have to sacrifice their servant for the other. And given their first encounter, it's unlikely that Assassin could have assumed that servant would be Archer. Furthermore, all servants that accept their summons also generally have a wish they want granted as well, which makes it even more unlikely that the assassins are content with their fate to die for another's victory. And we never learn enough about Hassan's character to confirm why he may or may not care if he lives or dies. They should have every motivation to be suspicious of their master, perhaps even opposed to work with him. Later on, we see that Archer sets a precedent that not all servants agree with their masters, and can in fact plot and scheme against them when they believe it benefits them to do so. This goes for both Archers actually. So why does Assassin remain content with the situation he's been brought into? The answer could be that Assassin is being used as a plot device. To be specific, all characters by their very nature are tools and devices to further the plot in whatever way the author sees fit. The difference between them and a plot device is that the former are written naturally and behave consistently with how their character was established. A plot device makes little to no effort to hide what it truly is, often moving the plot forward in a way that is contrived, contradictive, or generally counter to how their character was established. Besides general writing issues that can arise from this, a plot device is obvious for what it is because it doesn't obey the same rules as the other more well-written characters and can break the immersion of the story by doing this. But this description isn't completely apt for Hassan. Not entirely. The issue here isn't a contradiction with his character or a very obvious contrivance. Rather, the issue here lies with a lack of characterization. This is still an issue, since it's something that we'd need to know in order to understand his motivation, but nor is it something that couldn't be interpreted. A throwaway line could just as easily establish a desire to serve a master regardless of their wishes, even if it were to result in dying. This isn't too far off from another servant's motivation in the same show. This doesn't change that such a line was never included, but an unexplained motive is not as serious as one that is contradicted. Like I said, there's not very much to say about Assassin. He's a supporting character in the most textbook definition possible, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. He allows us insight into the world and how the Grail War is conducted by moving events forward that allows the story to show these things instead of simply telling us. Additionally, he acts as a means to push other characters' arcs forward in some small ways. He confirms Kyoritsugu's suspicion about Kirei, and he allows Kirei to track down Kyoritsugu in turn, creating the confrontation at the hotel. He's able to locate Castor and eventually learns about his whereabouts, leading to the bounty that will eventually be placed on Castor's head. And as mentioned earlier, he acts as a catalyst for an important milestone in Saber's arc with Ryder. These events are all moved forward naturally and without contrivance, and so much of it plays an important stepping stone in journeys yet to come. Arguably not the most important ones, but there's no denying the effect that a meager side character had on the overall plot. So which one of them is better, some of you might be wondering. And if you are, to which I will reiterate that is not the purpose of this format. I believe that there is value to be gained from comparing characters in this manner, especially as we advance to recurring characters. But in case you haven't already noticed, tallying up the best out of 7 servants by the end will unfairly skew things in Zero's favor. I'm under no misunderstanding that Zero is structured to develop a much larger cast, while Bladeworks primarily centers around Shiro and... well, just Shiro, actually. Everything still comes down to the characters, I stand by that much. But if Assassin is proof of anything, it's not the quantity of development for its characters, but the quality of how much there is that matters. If I were to pick a better out of the two, it would probably be Kojiro, ironically enough. Despite his lack of screen time, he uses it effectively to establish a character that just has more going on under the hood compared to Hassan, who isn't bad by any means, but is simply written more pragmatically. Stories, in many ways, are like a game of chess, each with their own established rules to follow, stakes for all parties involved, and roles of each of the characters to achieve. Not all pieces have the same value, not all pieces are played the same way. Some are kings, and others are mere pawns in those kings' stories. But all of them have value by virtue that they are here. Each piece, even the most insignificant pawn, has a role to play. They would not be here otherwise. Take Marcus from Arcane, for example. He's not nearly as prominent or important as all of the other characters, and he primarily exists as a mean to explain and facilitate Silco's rise to power and his influence over the other enforcers. He doesn't have an arc, instead choosing to cave into corruption even to the bitter end. But he's not unimportant just because he is less so compared to the other characters. The role of a pawn had to be given to someone, and his kingless role, as it were, doesn't diminish his importance. Marcus provided great context into the minds of the enforcers and Piltians that view the Undercity much less charitably than someone like Caitlyn. It provides valuable insight into the world, as well as reinforces the challenge of trying to mend relations between the two cities by showing firsthand the kind of animosity there is. You can't say some of the other arcs would be worse without him, but you can't say he doesn't add anything either. Hassan also has a purpose to fulfill. It's to show the lengths to which masters will sink to win, delve into the tools and methods that are used, and explore the world building by making us aware of how the war is fought. He is arguably integral to the world building, as so much of it is lost if you aren't already familiar with the larger world of Fate. But this is also the extent of his character, which is why I describe him as more pragmatic. He accomplishes what he needs to, but no more. He does much more than Kojiro from a plot perspective, but accomplishes much less as a character. Kojiro's development received little focus, but was still far greater, though he could have had more if we knew his role in all 3 routes, and yet what he accomplished here was still worthy of note. We almost don't need the other 2 routes to appreciate his character as it stands. If this is starting to sound like an analogy for Fate Stay Night, that's because it is. It has not been lost on me that I'm comparing a show that has a wider focus on its cast to another which has less. But as I said, I don't believe that matters. Zero will have more characters that are fleshed out more appropriately in its runtime, but Bladeworks will still have more time on its main character than Zero does. Both of these shows are roughly the same length, so they have the same chances to prove themselves regardless if it covers all 3 routes or not. After all, I cannot say that it is a flaw that this is only 1/3 of the story if it can still prove its worth in the time that it has. Because it's not a flaw that Marcus is less developed. It's not a flaw that Assassin is less important. It is not a flaw that Bladeworks has fewer developed characters than Zero, because it is the quality of the few characters that are developed that matter most. Kojiro is a prime example of how a succinct story can still carry a level of weight in its own right. As I said, Kojiro is very likely the better written of the two assassins, in spite of how much less time he appears on screen than Hassan, and the comparison between these two, and that of Zero to Bladeworks, is just as apt, nor is that comparison unfair. True, covering only a single route means that some characters will be underdeveloped. As you'll no doubt imagine, Saber's coverage will be drastically shortened, some will not receive coverage in the full scope of their backgrounds, and Sakura will not even have a place of her own in this video. Were I to bring all adaptations of Fate Stay Night into this comparison, that would change. The series would have more opportunities to shine, but it would also have more opportunities to make things worse. I will remind you that we still do not have a faithful adaptation of the Fate route, and so long as I am analyzing only anime, the Dean animation would have to become part of the comparison. Even if it was faithful, it is not something that you'd want me to analyze alongside Bladeworks any more than I would. Having that comprise nearly a third of the entire product would only make things worse for Fate Stay Night overall. I choose to compare Zero to Bladeworks alone, among other reasons, because both have roughly the same amount of runtime. True, Zero has a much greater focus on developing its background cast than Bladeworks, but as mentioned, this means that Bladeworks will ultimately hinge on the few relevant characters like Rin and Archer. But if Kojiro is any indication, characters with little development can still shine for what there is. Some characters in this analysis will not be as close as this, some will obviously be much better than their counterparts, but I believe that the better of these two shows will become apparent with or without such comparisons, and we've only just begun. I see nothing that is unfair about this, but I'm sure some will still disagree, and I can't say I don't understand where they're coming from. Much like the Assassins, it's unfortunate that Kojiro won't be given more attention than what we've gone over. The best we can do now is look to further contextualize his character through the analysis of characters around him. So, let's start by analyzing the next person on our list who was next closest to Assassin. Assassin's Master, Caster.